morning, everyone, and welcome to another edition of Your Life, Your Voice. My name is Julie Skiveris, and I'd like to welcome my co-host, Colette Altalpis. Hi, Colette, how are you doing?
Good, thank you. How are you? And hope our listeners and viewers are good as well.
So, do Your Life, Your Voice acknowledges the traditional owners of the land to which we work and live, and recognise the continuing connection to land, water, and community. We pay respects to elders past, present, and emerging. And we remember all self-advocates who have worked hard over the years for the rights for themselves and others, people with disabilities, and human rights for all. Nothing about us without us. There you go. So we'd like to welcome Sue Smith, who is the coordinator of SARU. Welcome, Sue.
Hi, Julie. How are you? Thank you for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to be interviewed. So let's kick off with our first question. So Sue, would you like to tell us a little bit about the history of the self-advocacy movement?
So the self-advocacy movement started in Sweden around 1969, and it started with family members coming together in a conference. But what happened there was the budding self-advocates also came together, and they met and talked about having their own voice. And from that was the genesis of that started self-advocacy around the world. And boy, did it spread quickly. From 1969 to sometime in the 70s, there was the first international self-advocacy conference. Now, traditionally around the world, Victoria is a bit different and Australia's a bit different. Self-advocacy groups are run by and for people with learning difficulties or intellectual disability. And they have, most of the groups in the other countries also call themselves people first groups. So we're people first, disabled second. They wouldn't use self-advocacy as much as is used in Australia. So it just took off. And if you go to Wikipedia and put in self-advocacy, the first sentence is self-advocacy is a civil rights movement for people with intellectual disability. But here in Australia and Victoria, that's expanded. So it's a phenomenal movement that still is growing to this day, but I would say an under-recognised movement, and most certainly an unfunded movement. I mean, obviously in different countries there is different funding, but again, there's that boom-bust cycle that groups or changes of government can lead to. But it's still strong, and the movements, where there's been a lot of bad things about COVID, there's one positive is that groups around the world started connecting through Facebook. So self-advocates in Australia are now connecting and attending meetings of self-advocacy groups in Canada and in the US and around the world. So it's led to this, back to the sense of a self-advocacy, an international self-advocacy movement. So yes, that's the kind of background start to it. And I became involved around 1981.
So what was one of the main challenges for you when you started?
Well, there were quite a lot of challenges because what started for me was that I had done teacher training, but I knew that I was a pretty rubbish teacher. And I was young and naive. And so I did a graduate diploma in special education, and I got a position teaching in an institution. Now, when I say naive, I would say when I first turned up there, I had no idea that this world lived in the same world that I lived in. It was shocking. It was just shocking. The staff, the first day there, I saw one of the staff members kicking one of the people. When we first got there, there was a day room that was just all lino with like a couple of chairs, but not enough for everyone. It was, so I didn't last very long at that, but we were very fortunate to start then we set up a weekend drop-in place, and people started coming up and building cubby houses, and we had an old car which only took people about 3 weeks to just break into pieces, but it was a safe place to go. And so it started out with, because when I was first there was a nursery, there was babies and young people in there. So the younger people started coming up, and then the older people started coming up, and they started to talk to us about their issues, and I started to hear about this self-advocacy thing. So we were kind of like a haven in really terrible circumstances. And John Payne, as the Premier, supported us. So he gave us our own little piece of land. So traditionally institutions are surrounded by land. In fact, where we were, there was a farm and farmers that worked for the institution. And he gave us our own space, and we quit our jobs, and he employed us through different job areas. So we were then independent, and from that we supported all the people to start their own groups. But look, myself and my good friend Jan, who also works at SARU, we didn't leave until the place closed, because we knew that everyone's life there is people just coming and going. So we were determined to stay. And so we took people out. We ran nightlife, we went out to bands, we did lots of stuff. And also people started learning about their rights and the right to speak up. Mm. And the first meeting we had was asking people what was the issue they wanted to raise and get addressed by the powers that be. And it was lamb's fry. They used to get lamb's fry for dinner, which had a green sheen on it, and it used to go straight into the bin. And so they wrote a letter, and we got the most bureaucratic letter back about, and they all hated it, about, well, we have to find out if they're going to get the vitamins and that from something else, and it's going in the bin anyway. No one's eating it. So, yeah, look, we've been threatened. It would be fair to say we were not liked very much, but we stuck it out, and there's still people that are there. The institution closed, thank goodness, and there are people that are in some of the self-advocacy groups now that had been in the institution, and their stories are getting out there through royal commissions and through videos, and yeah. So I'd have to say that was a very difficult period. It was all-consuming, and I don't think I could have do it now, because it was that passion of youth, as I call it. So yeah.
So staff could leave, but the people living there couldn't leave the place at all. So they had to live the life that was there. They couldn't get out of it at all.
No. Except that we were able to, get people out, supposedly, trips and stuff. But often we'd be going to a demonstration, and so you'd write where you had to fill in a form. So where are they going? Oh, we're going shopping. And he had a demonstration to close institutions. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's rather interesting, isn't it? how people had to basically not tell a lie, but they had to tell a fib to try and get things happening and fight for their rights.
Yep.
Anyway, how about we move on, ladies? So, can you tell us a little bit about your background and SARU?
Well, because I have had a long background in self-advocacy and also working with groups, but also making resources with groups, so videos and all of that. So when I saw the opportunity to apply to be a part of setting up the SARU, that was a no-brainer. For me, the best thing about it was that part of the model that is SARU is the SARU workers, we don't do advocacy. And the reason for that is our role is support the groups to do their own advocacy, to not be dependent on, workers. And that's the thing that I loved, because I'd done advocacy and it often felt like you're hitting your head against a brick wall. So to be free of having to do advocacy and to be able to just support groups and also help new groups to start and grow, as it has done in Victoria, is just been fantastic to see. And the Office for Disability have been really supportive of it, and so for me, it was the ideal job. And it's the ideal job because you can stand back, and if people need support or need you, they come to you. And so it's all about being in the background. And a great example of this is we're making a resource, we're supporting self-advocates to make a lobbying and campaigning resource around how to approach the government for ongoing funding for self-advocacy groups, because that's the biggest flaw in the whole system, is that groups can fall over at any time.
Mm.
And ILC just leaves to, now you've got a grant, now you haven't, now you have, now you have it. So it's about needing consistency. And I just had some questions, and that the Zoom meeting was about 7 people. They just went with it about, why having ongoing funding is important, what's the impact. And towards the end of the meeting, Dean and I were there, and I said, look, we don't have to be in the next one. If you want to run with it, you run with it. And they're like, no, it's good to have you guys just asking the questions. So, yeah, but ultimately it is about groups becoming independent and getting the funding that they need. And it's not a lot that would be required to make them self-sustaining into the future.
Mm. So, can you tell us a little bit about the SARU mission statement?
Well, we've only just done our strategic plan, updated it. I'd have to go to it. I haven't got it off the top of my head, but it really is about, I think it links to the acknowledgement of self-advocates. It's about behind the scenes supporting groups to become independent, to have a voice within government, to connect and network and use us as what we are, a resource unit. Come to us for to help you work with resources. So, I can edit videos, I can caption videos, sort of, we can be the workhorses and advice and support. I have to say that Victoria leads the way in self-advocacy in Australia, and not for any reason of the other groups around Australia, but mainly because of the forward thinking in setting up a self-advocacy resource unit and a disability advocacy resource unit that is totally dedicated to that area, those areas. So,
So, as you may know, I was part of the forum that was led by SARU to basically convince the NDIS to support self-advocacy. So I think that Victoria has a lot of background influence and examples really of how self-advocates can make life better, basically, for people with disabilities. So good on that forum, or whoever the brains behind that forum, because clearly, yes, self-advocacy is funded now with the NDIS. So that's well done to you guys and to us.
Yeah, a lot of groups don't get any NDIS funding a lot. Yeah, so that's the issue. Yeah.
Yeah, well, what I've found over the years, because I've been running self-advocacy groups for quite a while now, and you just can't plan without that continuing funding. So it's basically, the planning process is quite difficult. Um, and, with planning, you can build step by step. And it's just really quite impossible to have that forward thinking plan, the long term plan and the short term plan, because everything is funded, 1 year funding usually. So, yeah, so that's a little bit difficult to work with, but hey, we'll take it. Yeah, we'll take it and we'll run with it and we'll work with it.
So if we were to actually self-advocacy movement to get stronger, you'd actually work yourself out of a job, and you'd want that. You'd want people to be able to do that. But we it's like 2021, and we are still finding that we need to do that, like, because we need to hold people to account,
And look, that's absolutely right, to be done out of a job. But what the ideal is too is, and it would be a long process. So for instance, I've got a background in making videos. So people come to me for a video, and that I can work with them to make a video, and that's their video to use and put out. So I think the resourcing part is great, because it's just like anyone else. If you want a great book, you go to Snapfish and get that developed, but it's essentially your ideas. And I think that's the resources that the groups can use, and clearly, obviously, that also supporting groups to start making their own resources and developing their own resources. But we also worked. I also worked on another project alongside my good friend and colleague Sally on a national self-advocacy project. And that was when David Bowen was the CEO of the NDIA, the first CEO, and he funded us to go around Australia quite a few times. So with someone with a fear of flying, I did 36 flights. Oh my God, he was sitting next to me. She had to put up with that. But we went and visited all the groups, and the idea was to develop a national model for self-advocacy that included the amount of funding that would be required, the deliverables, and all of that came from, we met all the groups individually, and then we brought them all together in each of their states. And they informed what should be in that model. And it was 2.5 years of just an amazing opportunity. And the model was fantastic. And then CEOs changed. And we went to our first meeting with the beautiful book. And they I remember the person looking at it put their hand on it and said, it's a very good model, but we won't be doing all of it. And then about 6 months later, it was like, we're not doing it. So that was heartbreaking, because that's what's needed, a national self-advocacy focus. So we've been trying to do little things like, I said, we ran a national self-advocacy month last year on Zoom, and supported the groups to run that, and paid. That's the other thing that SARU does. We pay self-advocates So they facilitated the meetings and generated the conversations, and they were paid to do that. So that's something else that when we employ self-advocates as peer workers to work alongside us. But it's just lopsided, and you look at the difference having a resource unit in Victoria has made to the groups in Victoria compared to the rest of the state. I think as the rest of Australia, I think there's one group in Western Australia, none in the Northern Territory, 3 or 4 groups in Queensland, 3 groups in Tassie. South Australia started to expand a bit. I think they've got about 5 or 6 groups, and New South Wales, I'm not 100% sure, but I'd say 6 or 7. Some of them are just invisible, so you can't track them down. But all of them wanted a national model, all of them wanted funding, and not to be, but we're still trying, and we're now looking at working with Disability Advocacy Network Australia, looking at the idea of bringing self-advocates around Australia together to talk about the Royal Commission. So there still is the drive there. But the other thing that I would like to add in is, in that Zoom meeting that we had last week, what strongly came out of it was people saying, we advise government. They want our help. And they all talked about how many times have we sat around a table with, people working for council or people working for government or organisations, and the self-advocates are the only one at that table that aren't getting paid. And one of them says, I'm sick of just getting money for lunch, because we are the ones making the change and informing, and we have the knowledge that you need. So that came out really loud and clear, that they want to be on an equal platform with everybody else and not the only person sitting at the table sharing their knowledge, sharing their information, and being the only ones not getting paid to be there.
How do you think that would flourish? How would that flourish?
Look, it's a really difficult one, I have to say. I remember the former Peter Ferguson, who was the former chairperson of Brain Injury Matters, often the police academy ring and ask for self-advocates to come and talk about the issues people with intellectual disability or ABI are facing. And they rang her and she said, oh, yes, are we getting paid? And they said no. And she's the first person, because most people go and grumble that, I want to get the message. She was the first person, if you're not paying us, we're not coming. And it's that balance. People want to get the information there, but how long does it go on that you're just giving it away?
Yeah, it's really interesting, because if you're like, if you have some sort of degree or something, you pay for your knowledge, aren't you? And lived experience is a degree, really. It's a degree, it's a university of life. So that's it's really important. And given that today is International Women's Day, there are things in that movement to do with equality and pay gender issues that, really translate to the disability movement. So we'd like to wish everyone happy International Women's Day. So, and 3 very strong women today, and we hope you're enjoying this public holiday and are getting something out of this conversation.
And we also invite all the guys out there, all the men, join us and celebrate International Women's Day. Yeah.
So I was just thinking of how I was going to incorporate the men in this conversation. And yeah, there are lots of really proactive men. So yes, yes, so support your colleagues and partners, and to make it a really inclusive event day. So anyway, so how about we move on? What sort of resources does SARU provide?
So we have quite a lot of resources. One of the things that happened when I talked about that being funded to do the national Australian Self-Advocacy project, we also got funding to set up a resource website called Voices Together. And we also, as part of making those resources, we gave money to the groups to hire their own artist or writer or resource maker, so that they were in charge of making a resource, and then other resources we developed. So it's a very, very extensive resource. It's got over 80, 90 videos on it. It's got multiple resources for people with disabilities from core background, resources for people with ABI, First Peoples, intellectual. It is an incredibly extensive website. So it's got resources, it's got how-to sheets, how to get your health rights, how to, when we first went around traveling, it was interesting. And it makes you realise language matters. So we turned up one group and we'd like, so we're here to talk about making resources. Oh no, the first thing is we're here to talk about setting up a website. And the first question we got, what's the website? So there's the digital divide is also exists, particularly for people with intellectual disability. And then we were in South Australia, we said, so we're here to talk about what's resources? And then the group came up with, well, why don't you call them how to speak up, how to manage problems in groups. So there's how to sheets, there's training around how to set up a group, about your relationship rights and speaking up for your rights. So it's quite a big website. There's an area with us that is all directed towards self-advocacy groups, and there's another one, self-advocacy community and government. And of course, it's not a closed area. Self-advocates are actively involved in helping develop that too, but it's specifically aimed at telling government and organisations why self-advocacy is important, why it matters, and the incredible things that self-advocates have done to change things. They've generated change, absolutely. There's a fantastic video of Colin Hisco, who is one of the original members of Reinforced Self-Advocacy Group, as I mentioned before, the first self-advocacy group in Australia, meeting with Arthur Rogers, who had been in government, the manager or the head person within the disability part, which doesn't exist anymore, but just talking as friends about why self-advocacy matters to government. And it's a fantastic conversation. So yeah, there's lots of people just talking straight to camera, interviews, and it's been very well received because yeah, it's expensive and you can fall down the rabbit hole in it going through trying to find what you want, but yeah.
Yeah, I have extensively used the Voice Together website to create resources. So it's a great website. And just picking up on something you said, I interviewed Colin Hisco for our last interview last year. So very passionate man speaking about deinstitutionalisation. And he's in his 70s now, I think. And still, like, it's like the abuse happened yesterday, and it was a very powerful interview. So if everyone on YouTube would like to view that on demand, and have a look at the past and how Self-Advocacy has really played a key role in moving forward and not having people locked up and people having rights in their life. How about we move on? So, can individuals have access to resources for SARU, or do we have to be part of a bigger organisation like Diversity and Disability? I think that Sue has been kicked off Zoom.
Yes.
It's happened to me a couple of times. So how about we wait for it to log back in? I was able to log back in, so let's just wait a few minutes. So
quickly, if I can, I looked at that Place Voices Together, the Australian Self-Advocacy website. Easy to get in there and have a look. Yeah. Just need to unmute.
Sorry, I dropped out. Did you notice that?
it was very hard not to notice.
What I'm going to do is it keeps saying that my internet's unstable, so just bear with me, everyone. Sorry, I'm going to hotspot my phone.
Wow. Happy to read a couple of times over with his live interviews, so happy to someone else. So there you go.
Yeah. Sorry, everyone.
I guess it's interesting how, to be a good self-advocate, you can't be by yourself. You have to be in a group, to get that.
Yeah, it's really about, I guess, what the group enables is people.
You're frozen, Sue.
It's a really important way, but it's also about friendship and peers and look, what never ceases to amaze me, the times that I've been in a room when self-advocates are meeting with politicians or organisations or the NDIS, is the power of self-advocates speaking their stories, who pull those people in. You can see them changing, listening to the stories, listening to the experiences, and also listen to the depth of work. There's so many things that have happened as a result of mainly free work that self-advocates have done to bring about change. One of which, the self-advocacy groups in the 80s were very much a part of the campaigning to close institutions. And that history is another history. And I think there's a couple of videos on the website that refers to that history. There's a song, The Ballad of Drummond Street, which in the very early 1980s, the government had lots of empty old terrace houses in Carlton, and reinforced then, they said, well, why are these houses sitting empty? And why are they going for staff when we've got people in institutions that have coming out and they need, they don't necessarily want to be in group homes. But they occupied it, they squatted, and they were on the news, and there's a ballad called The Ballad of Drummond Street. It's a song that refers to it all. And they won. And it was Tom Roper was the minister at the time. And what I really think has changed since then, because you'd never get away with that now. No group squatting in a house, they'd be hauled out. But I think in the 80s, it was sort of considered an acceptable way to lobby, and they've still got the bottle of champagne that they shared with Tom Roper encased, reinforced in their office. So there was a lot of activity in the 80s around making change happen. There's also some great songs. There's a national self-advocacy anthem on there. There's the Rainbow Rights Anthem. But they all have really strong messages to give. Yes. And the national anthem is fantastic because when Sally and I travelled around, in front of each person, you know, there'd be like sometimes 20, 30 people in the forums down to smaller ones. We left a slip of paper and asked everyone just to contribute one lyric to the National Self-Advocacy Anthem, and Sally collected them all and put them all together and came up with a song. So you can say it was a song, a National Self-Advocacy Anthem that was written by self-advocates all around Australia, which was, yeah.
I haven't. It looks like going through.
Sorry, Julie, I missed that.
We're echoing.
Oh, that's me. I've got to go out again and come back in.
Yeah, how about that?
Sorry about that.
Okay. Echo nightmares back or there.
It's technology takes us to places that we, couldn't do before. So, they say if you like a rose, you got to put up with the thorn.
Yeah, well, even though all my windows were closed, I was still echoing at the start. So let's see what happens now. And she's back.
Sorry, everybody. I've got an extender, everything, and it just keeps coming unstable.
Yeah. Anyway, so we'll just move on. So can an individual access resources from SARU, or do we have to be part of a bigger organisation?
So individuals can access any of the resources on the Voices Together. In terms of supporting groups, we have kind of like levels of the support. So if you're in a self-advocacy, I'd have to go back and read it, but if you're in a self-advocacy group, yep, get any support. If you're, you caught me out on this one. If you are not a self-advocacy group, if you're not in a self-advocacy group, you can ask to access our resources, but we're not necessarily, and we can give you advice, but we're not necessarily going to do that hands-on, going out and supporting. And you're also welcome to attend forums that we run. So there's kind of like a staggered thing, but it's not ruling anyone out. It's just about the level of support we can give, because one of the things the SARU is, what we call our sister organisation, Disability Advocacy Resource Unit, they have a finite number of advocacy services in Victoria that they support. Whereas one of our deliverables is to support new groups to start. So the more new groups we set up, the thinner we're stretched in terms of how much we can provide. But it's still just joyous to see new groups starting and people getting out there and getting their voices heard and raising the issues.
So what's the key requirement to actually be a self-advocate? So we've got someone out there who's watching us, listening to us and saying, well, what are the main things to become a self-advocate? What have you got, like a number? Like, yeah.
Yes, that anyone can become a self-advocate, and one of the confusions that happen when you talk about self-advocacy, a lot of people, even within government or disability, think of self-advocacy as what's self-advocacy? Oh, it's a person speaking up for themselves. And that is true. But then self-advocacy groups are something different again, in terms of it's people coming together, and it also, while it absolutely is supporting and speaking up for themselves, it's also about social justice, making change happen, discrimination, and one of the things Colin, as you said, loves that we do, and he's done it with me, is if you're in a forum, you get one person to say, I speak up for my rights, and then you go, everyone heard that? Yep. But only a little bit? Yep. Now I want 1, 2, 3, everyone, and then it's loud. And so that's the thing, when you come together, you have a louder voice. And I think that's one of the things. And also people can share their stories of what they've been through in the past. They have a similar lived experience. And I think that's a strength too, and its importance.
So I think we've covered this next question, but maybe you'd like to add something. So clearly SARU has evolved since the inception of SARU. So how has SARU evolved to support self-advocacy groups?
Sorry, I missed that one. Sorry, Julie.
How has SARU evolved to support self-advocacy groups?
I think we're a very different organisation than we were at the start. We've evolved, but we've evolved in response to the groups. So it's really not, it's really about listening. It's also really about, and look, I've talked about this too. It's simple things too, in terms of if there's a meeting and people still want you to speak, but you go last. You don't come in and yet sometimes you do. And then you go home. And I often say to workers, it doesn't matter if you make a mistake as long as you reflect on it. You go home and you go, oh yeah, no, I think I dominated that too much. And at one time I rang up Colin and said, I'm sorry, I think I dominated that too much. And I apologise for that. So it's been a journey for all of us, I think. But now, I think the government has recognised, the state government, the work of the SARU in terms of, we have been offered funding to do projects from the state government. I think that they know that the groups get their voice, get heard, lead to change. And so, for example, that's where last year the government provided funding to SARU to develop and run the Staying Connected project, and that was funding to get devices out, so laptops, or if you didn't have Wi-Fi, dongles, tablets, phones, to self-advocates, so throughout 2020 they could stay connected, and training, and then we got funding again this year. That's happening until June, and that's been brilliant because it brings the group members together. And I think also the more that individual group members meet other group members, that increases the strength and the voice of statewide self-advocacy. So, we've been lucky in that way. And I remember when we first started, the other states, not so much. I remember Self-Advocacy Sydney said to us, you sure the Victorian border can't go sort of like a little skinny line up the coast and encompass Sydney and back down to Victoria? Because they want similar things, and rightly so, to have funding and to have a voice with government. And well, they do have voices with government. They're very strong self-advocates. But yeah, security, I think, long-term sustainability for self-advocacy, and the end of the boom bust cycle would be brilliant.
Yeah, I know that there's a project within SARU called Voice at the Table. So that's really taken off. So it's basically training self-advocates to join different committees and give their perspective on how governments can work better with their clients. So it's a really powerful project within SARU. Which is, I always get this a bit confused. So ABIDA is, how's ABIDA? ABIDA is the umbrella?
AMIDA is our lead agency, our auspice. So they deal with the money, that comes in. So SARU is run by a consortium, which is made up of Reinforce, Brain Injury Matters and AMIDA. And they're the consortium that runs us, and they look after the finance and, you know, staffing, contracts, that type of thing, job descriptions, yeah. So, yes, but, yeah, voice at the table. It's just gone from strength to strength. I first ran a pilot, I think the first voice at the table was I ran a pilot project, which was funded through the NDIA. Now it's funded completely by the state government. But it came about because I'd been involved in the Breast Cancer Network of Australia, and they had a project called A Seat at the Table, which was women who had had breast cancer should be sitting on meetings with doctors and researchers and inputting. And so I sat on that for a while and I thought, oh, I know this is so, we can switch this around. So look, that was only a small amount of funding, and it lasted for about 3 months, and then it just sat. And fantastically, Amy and the team then the government came and provided money to really run it, and they've just growing it.
It's really taken off, and
it really has. They've done an amazing job.
Congratulations to the team, who includes self-advocates and their paid positions. So well done to you all. So moving on, what would you like SARU to look like in 20 years' time?
Well, I'll start with not what SARU would look like in 20 years' time. Certainly one thing is that I won't be there. I turned 65 this year. 85, I think, no. But I'd love to see that. What I would love to see in 20, and this is a personal thing, is that self-advocacy is funded in an ongoing way around Australia, not just Victoria, that the self-advocacy groups are still there and haven't fallen over, that changes of government don't impact, that it's a set given, that groups are funded and continue, and that, you know, eventually groups need less and less support from organisations like SARU. But individual groups, you know, like I said in that meeting, were like, well, no, there's some level of support we want. So, but I hope it's there. And probably like me, a lot of the older self-advocates will have retired, and there's a fresh new millennial generation coming. And
I've definitely
taking it their way, not to be dominated or feel they have to model the past. Take it in their direction that matters to them at that time in 20 years' time.
So how would you do succession planning for that?
Oh, well, I don't think I'll be doing it. We've got some younger people working at SARU that will possibly take that on. Yeah. Look, I'm confident that it will continue. Whether or not SARU continues, again, that's all in the hands, isn't it, of changes in politics or changes in budgets or changes in how things are done. Yeah, but I hope that it thrives and grows, and a whole new generation takes it in their direction based on the issues that are important to them at the time, which I think are mirrored in things like they're going to be the climate change generation. Does that have a role for self-advocacy? I don't know. You know, they'll bring their own to it. But ultimately, I think I would like to see that self-advocacy still stays about having a voice, having rights heard, changing government attitudes, and the best thing ever would be to have supported and worked alongside groups to get ongoing funding. If that were to happen, well, then that would make such a difference, because they're in control of having money to pay for someone, a worker. They're in charge. They'd have so much more control, which frees them up from having to chase funding all the time and do the work that they're passionate about.
I've definitely seen peer-to-peer groups evolve within SARU. So that'd be good if that can continue on a bigger scale. Yeah, what are your thoughts too about that?
Yeah, look, that's interesting. The peer-to-peer groups are a little bit different from self-advocacy groups, and some self-advocacy groups would never consider themselves peer-to-peer groups or peer support groups, whereas, say, for Brain Injury Matters, very much focused on peer-to-peer and peer support groups. So I guess it's up to each individual group how they see themselves. I remember they were in a meeting with someone from government who said, you might want to reconsider calling yourself self-advocacy groups, because self-advocacy is a dirty word with government. You might want to call yourself peer support groups. And everyone sat there, and the minute that person left, well, at his go went, we're not changing the name self-advocacy groups. So some people, for some people to say I'm a self-advocate is to say that I have a voice, I have power, I speak up. So for some people, it's an identity to say I'm a self-advocate.
Yeah, it's really interesting because I have a background, I have a BA in community development, and community development workers are considered quite militant, and we're not. I don't think we are, but because we have a strong connection to minority groups and empowering them to have a voice, it's like put you in a position of, I went through this quite a few times, we're not going to hire you. And the attitude was, we're not going to hire you because, the militant side of community development. And so it's interesting that, and I've heard this before from my manager, how self-advocacy is considered a dirty word, but yet we maintained our focus and things haven't changed. Our mission statement hasn't changed on being supporting self-advocacy groups and having given them the platform to speak up and have their say on their lives. So I think we've covered this last question a little bit. So how do you see self-advocacy in 20 years' time in Victoria, and what would you like to see at both state and federal governments to happen?
Well, I think the first thing is, what I'd like to see is both state and federal governments recognising the work that self-advocacy groups do, recognising the contribution they've made to not only governments but the broader community, councils, across the board, employment, every area. I would like to see it recognised and acknowledged and funded. So that would be the big one. In terms of how I would see self-advocacy groups, did you say in 20 years' time? I think, as I said, how they see it. I don't even know if I can say what it would be in 20 years' time, because, well, I guess the one thing I would hope is that they're still there and there's passionate, new, driven self-advocates as members of groups and more groups. And maybe, and this is just a personal opinion, there's a few groups now that have started up that are issues-based. So there's a new group called Voices for Change, and their membership is people with acquired brain injury who've been in the criminal justice system. So there's potential there for groups to have a specific focus as well. That's their main area of activism and lobbying. I'd like to see activism stay. That's one thing.
There's been lots of work around criminalising the criminal acts of people with ABI, and it's a really interesting conversation to have because a lot of people with disabilities are in the criminal justice system, probably wrongly, and so I would personally like to see that more education being done around the criminal justice system and people with ABI and intellectual disabilities having more supports on that level.
Yeah, and like the Voices for Change group, they're doing that. They now go and talk at the lawyers' meetings, and they go and so what they're really passionate about, the members of that group, having the lived experience for other people that are still, in not great circumstances. They want them to know that because they've found that they can a different sort of way to have a voice. They want other people to realise that things can change, things can be better, and that for them the group's been that. So they really have done an amazing role in speaking and educating lawyers and legal systems, and and but the deficits too. One of the things is that people with ABI or with an intellectual disability have the right to what they call an independent third person if they've been interviewed by the police. And if you ask anyone in those groups, did they get an independent third person? No. Do you know what the independent third person is? No. So that's one of the issues I think that they'll be looking at too at some stage.
Yeah. Well, we talked about a lot in this program and within DD is if you don't know your rights, you don't know what to ask for, do you? So so that's really part of what these conversations we have on YouTube is all about.
Yep.
So that's the end of our interview.
No, can I just try to say the other thing that's really important is accessible information, because information's power. And if people don't get information in ways they can understand, then they're left out of that. And so we do what was weekly now, Fortnightly Newsletter, and when we put it out, we have an Auslan video of the content, or you can read it. There's an audio version, and there's just a plain text version for people with screen readers. So that's the other really important thing, is information is power, but you have to have the information that works for you to make the change happen.
Obviously, easy English and very, yeah. Well, thanks, Sue, for your time. We have to do acknowledgement of the funding body. You can hang around if you like, but we'll just go to our last segment. Let's have a look. So, Your Life, Your Voice project would like to thank the Margaret Resource Centre Northwest Region for their support they give to the D&D Your Life, Your Voice project. This project is funded by the Victorian DHHS and Moreland City Council, and I would like to thank them for providing support for this project in these very challenging, progressive time and thinking out of the box. Especially working through this pandemic. COVID-19 has been particularly difficult for people with disabilities being in isolation, and this channel is especially for them. The next sessions will be providing some information and support on COVID-19, and hopefully we'll never go back to lockdown. We'd like to thank our guest speaker for today, and this project would like your ideas on NDIS topics and guest speakers you would like us to interview. Also, any comments, whether they're on demand or live, will be really appreciated. We haven't had that happen yet, so that'll be rather exciting. So, all you guys, get on there and, give us your questions. So that's the end of our program for today. And thank you to everyone. And we'll catch you in 2 weeks' time with another great interview.